Yo guys, so for today's video, I want to just showcase a bit of what I have been working on as sort of a side project for the last month or so. Actually, probably a bit more than that, but I'm so busy these days that I don't often get time to even spend time on this, but so it's a bit scattered here and there. Um, But yeah, and it's pretty much about trying to model um, some new deck building metrics and trying to use them to gain insight um, into Yu-Gi-Oh deck building, pretty much. So yeah, and so the ideas in this video are still very preliminary. I'm still in like a very exploratory phase of this project, so nothing is really super formalized or anything like that. Um, but yeah, I still think it's there's some interesting things I want to talk about. Um, and so I should pretty much just start at the beginning, I guess. So this is like my sort of um way of trying to figure out Radiant Typhoon. So I've been playing Radiant Typhoon for a while, and I had a lot of deck building questions, um, where I didn't really know how to answer them, and so I tried thinking about some other kind of metrics that maybe wasn't the traditional ones you kind of get from a hypergeometric calculator and stuff like that. Um, So basically, Radiant Typhoon is pretty much just an example for this. It should in the end be able to be used for all sorts of other archetypes. And I'm sorry, my cat is kind of going crazy right now. Yeah, so in Radiant Typhoon, you might know that um, the deck building like figuring out the consistency of your Radiant Typhoon deck is actually not super trivial, because well, first of all, they had chant, so thank you Konami for making that part harder. But secondly, um, just looking at Radiant Typhoon, there's actually not a lot of starters. Like when you just look at it, like you have Elden, you have Sven, and then you have chant. And then it's like you have crochet, but obviously crochet is kind of conditional. You need to activate a quick play for her to summon herself, or you need to tribute summon her, stuff like that. And you also have Megala, but you need to actually also trigger Megala and stuff like that. Um, so yeah, the baseline consistency when you just look at the cards in like a hybrid geometric calculator, it's actually pretty bad. I think it's like 80% or something like that. Like just the consistency of opening one play or one starter is really low when you just look at it with a hyper geometric calculator, one of those tools you've probably been using. You can find them online, stuff like that, and you can basically just specify um, the cards that you want to see in your opening hand, and then it can sort of give you the probability of, for example, seeing at least one of those, stuff like that. And so that's a really easy way um, to calculate the probability of like opening a starter, right? You just put all the starters in one bucket, and then you use a geometric calculator to um, get your probability of seeing at least one, and then there you go. That's your consistency. Pretty much what the Yu-Gi-Oh community um, uses for the most part, and also the sort of the agreed upon way to determine the consistency. But for Radiant, that doesn't really work, and also for other decks, because you actually get quite a lot of consistency from, well, for two reasons. First off, you get quite a lot of consistency from cards like Vision, Radiant Typhoon Vision, and Pot of Extravagance. So uh, those cards are just cards that draw cards, and so the baseline Radiant Typhoon consistency is actually, maybe a bit higher than what you'd get in a hybrid geometric calculator. Uh, Pretty much just because you have cards that draw additional cards in your deck, and when you use them, you have a higher chance of seeing one of your starters or your starting plays. And so, and that's a bit hard to capture in using just a hybrid geometric calculator, because you can maybe use some simplifications to model, the probability of seeing a starter when you open Pot of Extravagance as one of your 5 cards, and then, combining that with the probability of opening Pot of Extravagance. But it gets a bit more tricky when you introduce the second part of the complications with Radiant Typhoon, which is you have a lot of 2-card combos which are not super clean. Like, I think my favorite example is that normal summoning Fuvelas and then using Fallen into Virtuous on that is a starter if you have Crochet in hand. So I guess that's a 3-card combo, but you get the point, right? There's a lot of different weird ways to start your plays in Radiant Typhoon. Um, setting a spell and MSTing that spell while you have Crochet or Megala in your hand is also a 2-card combo or a 3-card combo, I guess. You know, a tribute summoning Crochet is also a 2-card combo, which you can't do if you have a Radiant Typhoon monster that can special summon itself, and then you can tribute normal summon Crochet. So, for example, Megala plus Crochet is technically a starter, and so you have like a really long, actually, list of combinations that are not super intuitive, and you have to do a lot of work with the hypergeometric calculator to capture all this stuff. Like, um, and it gets really hairy pretty quickly. And so, and the second part of the issue is that just your baseline consistency, the chance of drawing a starter is not necessarily too indicative of a deck's strength going first, actually. It is certainly a good heuristic for it, or sometimes people say that it's a requirement. There's this like 90% requirement idea going out there, right? Like your deck needs to be 90% in terms of consistency, and what that means is usually that 90% of times you need to see a starter or a play, a 2-card combo, some sort of play for your deck to be consistent. And I need to watch out for my cat; she's crazy. Um, I not for my own safety, but for the window's safety. She's jumping up in the window all the time. Um, but um, but in reality, we all know that a lot of the times you maybe see a starter, but it just gets hand trapped, and so that at that point you need another thing to do. And so, going up against one hand trap is actually not that uncommon, right? It's actually pretty common. So just because your deck is very, very consistent at having one starter, that doesn't actually capture the entire picture of how strong your deck is going first, and certainly not going second, right? Because going second, you often expect to face interruptions that prevent you from playing. So that's why I am in the process of designing this new metric that can be used completely with this old consistency metric. It's not really they're not really in conflict with each other. It's purely an extension of it. And it's called unique plays. So it's basically a metric that calculates your probability of opening or that represents the probability of opening um, a unique play. And then you have different kinds of that metric, which is you have the probability of opening one play, which is the same as, opening one starter, the one we normally know, and then the probability of opening two unique plays and three unique plays, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of like an extension of the same idea, where instead of just looking at your probability of opening one uh, uh, play, we also look at the chances of opening more plays, because that actually gives a sort of more nuanced picture of how good your deck really is going first through fighting through interruptions, and can also give some insights about maybe why your engine is not great going second, if you don't have a lot of average unique plays. And what I mean by unique plays, first off, taking the play part of that word, it's basically just a starter, but I broadened the definition a bit to play, which means basically just a way to play the game. And it's a bit broader than just a starter, because in sort of the terminology I use, a card can be a starter. So you can have a Sven X is a one card starter. Um, um, Eldam is a one card starter, and so on and so forth. But you can also have two card starters, right? For example, Manifestation plus Ascendance, that's a two card combo, right? And so it's a bit weird, you could call that a two card starter, but at the same time, sometimes it's also things are also plays, even though they're not starters. And what do I mean by that? Is that, for example, say you have an Eldam and a Crochet in your hand, and your Eldam here is a starter, right? But Crochet is only a conditional starter. You need to sort of get her on the field somehow. And so you play your Eldam as your first play, and then that Eldam will get hand trapped, maybe like Imperm or something like that. And then you actually open up a new play from that point on, which is that you can tribute summon the Crochet. So that's what I mean by plays instead of starters. At that point, when you just look at your hand, you see Elden plus Crochet. You wouldn't necessarily think of Crochet as a starter here. It's rather an extender in this case, because you need to go for the Elden first anyway. And so I'm just kind of combining all these things into one term called a play, right? Something that starts off a line of play, or a combo line, whatever you want to call it, to get to an endboard. That is like a play. And so that could be two cards used together, that could be one card, could be three cards, that could be two monsters on the field that you go into an extra deck monster to get you started, get you going, right? So play is really just a generalization of the starter terminology in a way that it works on already established game states, right? So it doesn't need to be a starter. Doesn't need to be the first thing you do. Can also, some plays can be enabled mid combo, right, by an extender or something like that. But you must also, see a starter, right? So it's a bit tricky, but the idea is to just sort of capture all these different ways of playing the game into one metric called just play. And then there's the unique packs, so unique plays. And unique here is pretty important, because let's say you could just put in infinite Eldams in your deck, right? You just have a deck with a ton of Eldams, and then your chance of opening a play would actually be pretty high, because you have a ton of Eldams, right? But they're all sort of duplicates. So if one Eldam gets stopped, the other Eldams in your hand are not really doing anything for you. And so we want to capture that as well in these metrics, because a lot of times you can increase the consistency of your deck by including more functional copies of already existing starters in your deck. For example, Noble Knight Shield Bearer can search Eldam, but not anything else, and fire formation tanky can search to vent, but not anything else. So you can increase the consistency of your Radiant Typhoon deck by including more copies of these cards, but you are sort of also increasing the redundancy of your deck. And in practice, it's not necessarily going to lead to a more consistent deck in terms of fighting through interruptions, as we all probably know. And so I wanted the metric to capture this, which is why it only counts the unique lines of play. That's really important. So if you sit with two Eldams and one Sven, that is still only two unique plays, right? And so that's why I always prefix these things with unique plays. So probability opening two unique plays, right? And the idea is not necessarily that you should expect um, everything to get hand trapped all the time, but that these duplicate copies don't really add any value to your deck. So the idea is that a play should not be dependent on another play's effect to resolve. And I made this distinction a bit, which is like maybe a bit iffy, but I choose specifically to let it depend on not the effect resolving. So for example, if you Eldam, summon Eldam, it gets negated. You still have the body on the field that you can use for another play. And that's kind of an assumption I made here. You know, sometimes, I I don't know why your opponent would want to Ghost Ogre the Eldam, but they could, right? There exist ways to remove the body on turn one. Cyframe, Gamma, definitely, one of that kind of contradicts that assumption, right? But this is like sort of a just generic going first modeling of metrics, right? And so I wanted to do that simplification to just since I think it actually fits quite well in practice. It's often the effect that gets negated and not necessarily anything else. So plays should not depend on other plays resolving, but they might depend on other plays establishing game pieces on the board. That is sort of my general idea. And again, this is all like really exploratory early, so I'm still designing all these things. I'm still revising a lot of things, but it's still like the main idea. Okay, so that was quite a lot. So let me just show you one example of how you could maybe do calculate these metrics and use them to help you in your deck building. And so here on the right hand side, I have this deck list here, and this is just a sample deck list where you can see there is a lot of locked in stuff up here. And it's just the basic, the Radiant Typhoon core. This is the 21 engine cards that I would say that you should always play in Radiant Typhoon, no matter what. Like these 21 never leaves the main deck, even post side, pretty much. And then I put in some non-engine as well, just a bit so that this is kind of the lowest I want to go. I didn't really want to go below 11 non-engine. And then here I have 8 slots left in my deck. So, taking 21 and combining that with the sort of 11 locked in non-engine, I end up with 8 cards that I can sort of flex. 8 open slots, I called them here in this specific scenario. And I wanted to sort of see, okay, using these metrics, what would I then have to put in these 8 slots if I was just optimizing these different metrics here? And so basically, the way to this is a sort of working on some Monte Carlo simulations, and basically what it does is pretty much just swapping in different configurations in these 8 open slots. So different kind of putting in engine, putting in non-engine, and then running the Monte Carlo simulation to calculate these different kind of metrics, and then comparing the resulting metrics of different builds pretty much where different configurations of these open slots. And so to calculate the metrics themselves, to model the place, you really need to do a bit of work annotating. So for example, if I go into my card reference file here, you can see that for something like Megala, she's a conditional starter, and her condition is that she requires an oh, there's a spelling mistake. Let me just correct that. Requires, yeah, she requires an activatable radiant typhoon quick play, one activatable mystical space typhoon in order to function as a starter, right? So and you have Crochet, requires an activatable quick play, monster on the field to use for tribute summon if once per turn normal summon has not been used in order to function as a starter. So you have, of course, there's also just regular starters, right? Like Eldem and Sven. And then there is also, you know, the cards that just draw cards, like Vision here. I labeled those consistency. I don't really know. Well, I'm still in the process of trying to figure out a framework of annotating these different cards into categories that you can then use to base your simulation of. But in practice, the first thing I did was create these annotations here and just in natural language try to describe, you know, what the different roles of the engine cards are. And all the different starters and all the different conditional starters and what their conditions are, or if they have some sort of requirements in sort of in terms of deck building. So, for example, Horse of the Floral Knights is a conditional starter. And it requires at least one copy of Noble Knight Shieldbearer present in the main deck to function as a starter, because all it does is on normal, use normal summon it, grab Noble Knight, and then Noble Knight grab Elven, right? So try to, like, in natural language, describe what is going on here. You can also see just like this functional equivalence. It just reduces to a Noble Knight Shieldbearer, which in turn reduces to a Noble Knight Elden. Anyway, then when you have that that sort of framework build up, you can use that to sort of take a given hand, and you can look at it and you can then see, okay, what are my starters, what are my conditional starters, and is there some way that these conditions can be met, right? So you can take a given hand, you can see, okay, I have a Megala in my hand, and I know that I need a Mystical Space Typhoon or an uh, Radiant Typhoon Quick Play, as they need to be activatable for Megala to function as a play. And so, you know, I can see it, look at my hand, is that possible? And does it rely on other plays resolving for that to be possible, right? So that's the whole unique place. So if you have a Sven and you have a Megala in your hand, yes, technically the Sven can grab the card that would fulfill the requirement of or the condition of Megala, but you know, we so Megala can function as a way to increase your ceiling, but it's not an extra unique play because it does rely on the Sven play to resolve. Yeah, and then you can pretty much generate the sort of skeleton for the Monte Carlo simulation based on that. And you have to write a bit of code. You can obviously also just get, you know, AI to do it for you. It probably need a bit of explaining, but you don't. I don't think you need to be very proficient at coding to do this stuff. Um, and and then once you have that set up, you can sort of take a specific configuration of your deck, and you can run a one of these Monte Carlo simulations, which can then output these play metrics. That's the general idea. I'm not like super early on in. I'm very super early on in this, so I don't have any like clean code. My code is mostly just AI generated. You can see here. It's not necessarily super pretty. Oh, actually, it's probably this one here. And so it's a lot of different enumerations. Um, Basically, a way of codifying the annotations I've already made, and then you can, you know, uh, uh, run the simulation. But I want to create a tool at some point that does this for you. But yeah, this is still very early on, so um, I don't feel too comfortable sharing any of this right now. Um, the main point is obviously to capture these draw effects like from vision and pod, because that really boosts the consistency um, of your Radiant Typhoon deck. And so for that, I think you need to probably go into a Monte Carlo simulation to sort of capture that for a given deck. And so the idea is that you sort of you scan for a play given during a hand, right? And maybe you see some plays, maybe you don't, but you activate the part of extravagance, you see two more cards, and that changes what kind of plays that you will be able to do. And not just because you see too much more cards, but specifically because of what two cards you see, right? So that's the important part. So it actually matters that you draw two specific cards, and so um, that's the reason why we run simulations and a lot of different simulations, because you can we obviously that can depend a lot of one they can depend a lot on what you draw, and so we need to sort of make it into sort of a statistical average. um, but yeah, I'm just getting a bit ahead of myself. um, then one of yeah, so the application I wanted to talk about was this sort of um, mm, experiment here, with pretty much just saying, okay, so I have 8 open slots in my deck. What could I put in? And you can see here, so basically what it's doing is that it's just trying different configurations of uh, Brilliant Typhoon, different configuration of these 8 open slots, and it's running as this Monte Carlo simulation for that, generating the metrics, and then storing those metrics in a file, and then ultimately it compares the different metrics against each other to see what sort of additions in these 8 open slots that generate the highest value, or the highest increase in these metrics. And so it's not really, it takes a while. I think it took like 3 hours for me to run this on just on my own computer. But and it's not super well made yet. It has a problem where it really just wants to add a bunch of engine. Um, and I'll get into that in a in a moment why that is. You might be able to tell. And it also really favors these one card starters, right? So I had to actually explicitly limit the number of copies of Noble Knight and Tenki it was allowed to add to just one and one, because it just kept adding more Noble Knights and more Tenkis, and eventually going over to Horse of the Fall uh, Knights for this P1 here. So P1 is like the traditional consistency metric we usually talk about in Yu-Gi-Oh, which is like the chance of just seeing one play, right? And you can obviously tell, you can obviously imagine why adding more Noble Knights and more Tenkis actually is the optimal way to increase um, this metric, right? Because here we don't really care about redundancy at all. We just need to see one singular play. So it's actually maybe not too surprising that what is optimal here is just adding more nobles, just adding more tankies, and we see that our baseline consistency here is at 81%, and so that is including vision. So just a clean, super minimal, the most minimal Radiant Typhoon build you could probably have, like with engine wise, is 81% consistency, which is obviously really terrible. Um, and And then we see here that we get the biggest increase from adding Noble and Tanky in the beginning here. So E1 is like I didn't add any engine, and then E0 is that I didn't add any engine, and then E1 is that I added one engine card, E2 is that I added two engine cards, all the way down to E8 where I used all my open slots to add engine, right? And yes, so it immediately adds the Noble and the Tanky, and then I had to say, hey, can we chill with the Noble and the Tankies? Because it would just add more Noble and Tankies down here. And you can see that the addition in value here drops off pretty dramatically when going over to the secondary option, which is Megala here actually. It's pretty interesting. It does think that Megala is the next best consistency option apart from more nobles and tankies. And so you can see we do reach the 90% threshold here down at E4 where it chose to add the pot of extravagance actually, apart from the second Megala, which is pretty interesting. But we can see there's a pretty dramatic drop off in the delta here when it comes to adding more engine cards just to see just to see one play. It really is just the noble and the tankies you need, and you don't need a lot. I suspect you can probably get to 90% by just adding a extra noble here. So if you want to play two nobles and one tanky, you could probably get to 90% consistency in Radiant with just three engine guards. Although, you know, you don't see anyone doing that in Radiant Typhoon. And that's probably a good reason for that, right? Because we all know that this is very redundant, right? Now, looking at the two P2 frontier, it actually still just wants to add nobles and tankies in the beginning, right? And you can see that they just add a ton of value. So this is your chance of seeing two distinct plays in your opening hand. And we can see for the E0, for the baseline Radiant build, we have a 42% chance um, of seeing two unique plays, which is not a lot, right? So it's basically less than half the time you're not able to play through two hand traps. But about 42% of the time you are able to play through one hand trap because you will have another distinct play in hand. And so we can pretty rapidly increase that to 50% just by adding Noble and Tanky. And then switching over to Megala, we can see here that we actually have a rather, you know, um, less drop off uh, in increase here than we had for the P1. So Megala it did not do too hard in the P1 frontier, but is looking at the P2 frontier, we can see that her value increases, right? And that is actually pretty intuitive because Megala is a distinct play a lot of the times if you're able to trigger her. She is something that is different from Eldem and Sven. So adding more copies of Eldem and Sven can still be worthwhile in the beginning, but then later on, when adding further engine cards, the value of Megala really begins to shine because she is sort of one of the unique plays that you actually have in Radiant Typhoon. So, you know, if you want to increase your ways of extending through hand traps, then, you know, having Megalas is actually pretty good for that because she is just a completely unique play. And so we can see here that Megala's comparative value increase in the P2 metric is pretty good. And you can see here pod comes in as well. Pod is also one of those cards that doesn't really increase your P1 metric by that much because it's almost always it is always more valuable to include a one card starter apart from Pot of Extravagance in your deck in terms of just baseline consistency, you know, P1 consistency. But the additional draws from Pod can really help on the P2 and P3 frontier because you do see extra cards, which helps a lot in terms of finding more unique plays. So that's really the trade-off with Pot of Extravagance captured is that it's not as consistent as adding a new one-card starter. on the P1 frontier, but it is helping you get more unique plays. So if your baseline consistency is met, reaching the 90%, then we can see adding part actually increases your chance of being able to play through interruption a lot more, right? So here we can see it starts to add pot again, and yeah, it also I also threw in a wind charm channeler into this mix, which is it also really likes. So this isn't perfect. I don't think it should really prioritize this card, but maybe there is something about this card. It's obviously not a great card, but I just wanted to throw it in there for completion's sake. And hey, that is what it ended up winning out in these higher engine configurations and these metrics. So yeah, still a work in progress. I don't think that adding a bunch of the win channeler is the right choice, but it certainly does seem to add to your P2 consistency. And then, of course, the P3 frontier is really just dominated by Megala. It even adds Megala before Tenki and Noble here. And then the P3 metric is your chance of opening 3 distinct plays. And so you can see that is already really low in the minimal engine build, like 8.79%. But we can see here that down in the E5 configuration, so if you're willing to add 5 engine cards to the base Radiant configuration, you actually get up to 20% chance of seeing 3 unique plays in your opener, which is a doubling pretty much. And it's here that Megala does a lot of the heavy lifting. This thing. It's kind of like with part of extravagance, but even more so that Megala is not really great for increasing your baseline consistency because it is a 2-card combo. But for finding more unique plays, it's probably the best thing you can do in Radiant Typhoon because it is one of the few unique plays that you don't actually play free of already. So yeah, we see here why Megala is often something you of course side in going first in Radiant Typhoon. You side in extra copies of Megala, and that is because yeah, unique plays. This is the card that will help you fight through 2 hand traps. So P3 is obviously your chance of beating 2 hand traps. Kinda, a bit of a simplification, but it's pretty much that. And we see that that's really low in Radiant Typhoon, which makes sense if you play Radiant. You know that you get hard stopped a lot by 2 hand traps. But we also see that hey, the reason to beat 2 hand traps is pretty much Megala. Right? That's Megala, part of Extravagance here, just really help you beat hand traps. And so this down here, CP1 is like a clean play. I had to sort of make a distinction about specifically one Megala line where you set a non-engine and you MST that non-engine in order to trigger Megala, or the place where you summon Megala and you don't use her at all, but you just use her as tribute fodder for Crochet. The simulation was really favoring Megala for a long while, and I had to sort of tell it that these plays are not that clean. And so um, you I created this extra metric here, which is pretty much just excluding those plays, right? So excluding those weird Megala lines, weird crochet lines that actually just are very risky, right? If you get hand trapped on that, you just randomly lose one non-engine. You know, just special summoning Megala and then tribute summoning crochet is not great, right? Because if you crochet get stuck, you just went neg 1 for no reason. And so this is the metric that takes that into consideration and excludes those plays. And you can see that it obviously starts to not include Megala at all. And uh, I just wanted to show that quickly because while I do think that Megala is still a great card, the simulation was definitely over favoring her because those plays actually contributed a a pretty big point actually to the value of Megala. I think it was maybe 3 point something percent of your plays were those that I then labeled forced plays. And so you can still obviously do them, but we all know that they're pretty risky. And so I thought it would be interesting to see, is Megala still worth it without considering those forced plays? And I would still say yes in some builds, but and this is also just a P1 frontier, right? The chance of running one play where you could already see that Megala is not very valuable to begin with, and even less valuable when you take these force plays out of the equation. So I think the conclusion is, or the preliminary conclusion is that Megala really just lives in the P through P2 and P3 realm, not really in the P1 realm. So great for letting you fight through hand traps, not that great for actually increasing your consistency compared to other options. And then finally here, I want to talk about non-engine a bit. So um, yeah, so basically the thing is that this play metric here really only, the sort of weakness of it is that it really only captures engine cards, and so in these sort of different runs of simulations here, you can see that I did. You can see that it really just favors adding engine cards. Like I had 8 open slots, and I didn't obviously tell it that it only was supposed to add engine cards, but it did, right? Because the non-engine cards don't provide any value in these metrics. There's no reason to include them when just looking at this play metric here. So that's a big issue that I'm working on. And so, because obviously, all Yu-Gi-Oh decks that are good also include non-engine, right? And that's just not captured by this unique play metric. Um, and so my attempt on this was making another metric, which is still very much a work in progress, which is the great hand metric. And that's pretty much just a combination of the play metric and then seeing some non-engine as well. So it's sort of um, uh, I don't actually know the correct term for it, but it's a modular metric. So it has two different parameters it can take. The first one is the P metric. So this is the first number here. And we see for G21, um, uh, 2 is our play metric. So for this case, it's the P2 metric we give it. So the chance of opening 2 unique plays. And then the second parameter is the number of unique non-engine we want to see in our hand. And so this one, the great hand metric 2-1 is basically our and we want to see uh, 2 unique plays, and we want to see 1 unique non-engine. And then the G21 is then the probability of that happening given a specific engine configuration. And so here you have G2, which is a G22, which is the probability of seeing 2 unique plays and 2 unique non-engine. G31 probability of seeing 3 Unix plays, and then 1 non-engine. And then here, I think maybe these two are the most relevant in Radiant, which is your chance of seeing 3 unique plays and 2 unique non-engine, which is a completely stellar hand, right? If you see that, you're basically, that's sort of almost as good as it gets, maybe even only eclipsed by the G41 hand, which sees 4 unique plays and 1 unique non-engine, right? So these two are these are the god hands, right? If you see these, you have pretty much no duplicates in your hand, or you actually don't have any duplicates in your hand. I don't think these hands allowed for duplicates, and you are seeing a really healthy combination of engine and non-engine at least for a deck like Radiant, where you want to be engine heavy. And so on the rows here, we see different numbers of engine counts in the open slots configuration. So it goes from 0 to 8, where 8 is that we use all our open slots on engine, and 0 is that we use all our open slots on non-engine, right? So we have suddenly brought non-engine here into the picture. And we can see, obviously, in the first column here that the more engine we add, the better this G21 metrics actually gets. So it's still not really favoring adding more non-engine at any point, because this is only just requiring one unique non-engine piece, and we, in our baseline configuration, already have 11. So it figures that, 11 is good enough to see one unique non-engine piece. And we can see a mirror of that over in the G4 one here. I also don't really thinks that adding anything non-engine wise is worth it, because we already have 11, and that should be enough to see one on average. So we can see that it's sort of always increasing here. On the G22, we can actually see that it actually is a bit more interesting. We start off by seeing an increase when adding more engine pieces, but then we sort of peak here at about 4 engine pieces added. Then it sort of becomes a very marginal value decrease here. Even before here with 3 engine pieces, we only see a 0.5% increase by adding an extra engine piece. And then beyond that, we actually see a small decrease following adding even more engine pieces. So right here in around 4 here, it actually thinks that, hey, if I want to see 2 engine pieces consistently, and they have to be unique, then I actually want, some non-engine in my open slots as well. Right here, it wants 4 non-engine pieces, which 11 plus 4 is 15. So it thinks that, if I only need to see 2 unique plays, and I also need to see 2 unique non-engines, then it's actually a bit, it actually prefers half and half, 4 engine pieces added and 4 non-engine pieces added. So, and here in the G31, we can see that it still just increases pretty steadily, because one non-engine is pretty easy to reach with the baseline 11. And then here in the G32, yeah, I guess it also pretty much increases this similarly, except for here actually. It actually starts to go down beyond 7, right? And it does actually also show this behavior of at some point adding more engine does not become worth it, just because we're not reaching our non-engine goal. But it comes later than the G22, because we need to see 3 unique plays here to satisfy our engine predicate, and that it requires a lot more engine pieces. And so it actually goes all the way up to 7 engine pieces before it sort of chooses to forgo adding more non-engine, or adding more engine in terms of non-engine. So pretty interesting. Again, just a disclaimer, these are all don't take any of these numbers too seriously. They're all pretty much just very preliminary things. They're not like established results. None of this is very hard validated. I did spend some time on it, but I did not go through like proper validation procedures yet. It's not formalized any of this yet. So do not take any of these numbers too seriously. This is just meant as a sort of overview of my general ideas of these two metrics, the P metric and the G metric, and how they might be used to sort of move us forward in deck building techniques, pretty much. And I want to sort of a last detail with this G1 here, because you might be wondering, maybe you're not, but maybe you are, what exactly non-engine is it adding here? Because there's obviously difference between non-engine, especially in Radiant Typhoon, right? You know that monster non-engine is actually not that synergistic in Radiant Typhoon. Like, for example, Fuvalos is not doing a whole lot in Radiant Typhoon, and on the other hand, a quick play non-engine can actually do some stuff in Radiant Typhoon. For example, enable crochet. So there are specific non-engine that can actually have an influence on the P metric. And so I tried to include that here with running two different sets of simulations. One set of simulation that only included adding monster non-engine, so that's the less synergistic one. And then the one we are looking at here, which is adding quick plays non-engine to in the open slots, and that's more synergistic. And basically the difference between them wasn't too interesting, pretty much just that the P metrics are a bit higher when you add obviously when you add non-engine. So the consistencies, these numbers are just a bit higher, but they show the same pattern pretty much. It's just a bit higher here, because you know, you do have these small cases where you could play, you know, for example, using Fallen Under Virtues on your Pot of Extravagance or something like that, to summon Crochet, or some of these weird niche lines that only provide like a marginal difference, but still a real difference. And then we have the clean plays, right? This is the Megala forced clean plays I was talking about. Um, yeah, it's not too interesting actually. It's pretty much just the same. Yeah, I think it actually just is the same, but just lower numbers. Right, you see slightly lower numbers because we now are not including the forced Megala playlines. But the sort of behavior seems to be about the same. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. That's what I've been working on and will continue to work on. Please let me know if you have any feedback, if you have any ideas for these metrics, if you have any ideas for new kind of metrics, if you can spot something that I did really wrong here, I would also be very interested, because this is still really early on, that none of this is static. I'm constantly changing around things, and so yeah, pretty much it. I hope that it would at some day be useful, and I also hope that it will be generalizable to other archetypes, so that it can be reused for other archetypes. But that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about today. Leave a comment if you actually watched this video, and yeah, see you guys later.